What Are the Odds by Mike Lindell. From crack addict to CEO. Continued. Chapter 23. You can't stop me. Wayne Belial's offer to buy my pillow included wiping out the patent debt I owed him, along with $100,000 in cash. He would also make Karen and me salaried employees. As I contemplated the deal, I thought about that a lot. Regular income and a clean slate. The idea appealed to me. I told Wayne I would meet him on December 22nd to sign the deal. That afternoon was bitter cold and overcast. I jumped in my pickup and drove east on I 494 toward Bloomington to meet Wayne as agreed. When I pulled my truck up to the Sofitel, a low, sprawling hotel not far from the famous Mall of America, I didn't see Wayne's car in the parking lot. Maybe he was already inside, waiting to take over my company. Part of me hoped he'd changed his mind. I was a little early, so after cutting the ignition, I sat in my truck for a few minutes thinking. On the one hand, signing the deal would mean a fresh start for Karen and me. On the other, the second I signed, my pillow would belong to someone else, forever. My reluctance wasn't really about the money. It was that strange dream that was nagging at me, that out of body essay, or whatever you wanted to call it. I hadn't looked at those 6 pages since putting them behind the album cover. Now I tried to recall what I had written. There was something about a platform. I remembered that much. Then there was that weird phone call from Cindy with the story about her pastor. That part was still perfectly clear. Me standing in my garage, holding my cell to my ear. The dream said I'd know when the time is right, I told her. And when that time comes, you have to do it, she said. You promised me that. That essay hadn't had anything to do with my pillow, but now I was beginning to feel the two were connected. On the other hand, I had to be practical. Card counting wasn't working out so well, and I was spending so much money on coke and crack that I needed money again for Christmas presents. And to be completely honest, for food. The truck engine ticked. The temperature outside was somewhere in the 20s, and frigid air had seeped into the truck cab, pushing out the residual warmth from the heater. Finally, I sighed heavily and headed for the hotel restaurant. Wayne was already seated inside. He greeted me warmly and gestured toward the opposite chair. On the table in front of him sat the purchase contract, a notebook, and a pen. We made small talk for a few minutes. Wayne spoke with the relaxed rhythm of a man comfortable with doing business, but my nerves jittered. Finally, he smiled across the table at me, picked up his pen, and asked, "Well, are you ready to get this done?" After my long internal wrestling match about this decision, I thought I would hesitate when the moment came, but I didn't. Instead, I said straight out, "I'm sorry, Wayne, but I've been thinking a lot about this, and I just can't sell my company." Wayne's face flushed, and he stabbed his ballpoint pen into his notebook so hard that the tip came out the other side. He started yelling. I started yelling. Soon, hotel security appeared and insisted we depart the premises. Wayne and I argued all the way across the parking lot until we both got into our vehicles, each slamming the doors. I sat in my truck red faced, my heart beating fast from the adrenaline of the argument. I was frightened but elated. I had no idea how we were going to survive, but I still had my company. I had no idea then how hard I would have to fight to keep it. In late 2005, I borrowed money from my dad to keep the business going. But by the spring of 2006, we were out of cash again, and my solution was to refinance our house. It was the middle of the subprime mortgage boom, and we could get more money than our house was worth. Even at that, we'd only get $20,000 cash. Still, it felt like a fresh start. I promised myself I was going to do better this time. Once again, though, crack got in the way. Karen and I drove to Milwaukee for a show at the fairgrounds. We'd learned there was an office in town where we could sign the closing papers for our refinance. On the drive, we ran through our remaining cocaine supply and, with only $200 to our names, knew we would have to get more when we got into town. That's how twisted our priorities were. Here we were, on our way to borrow the last bit of cash we could, but our first objective in Milwaukee was to get more drugs. As we made our way to the hotel, I suspected we were driving in a pretty bad neighborhood. I called my dealer Joe, who confirmed it. Get out of here, get out of there now, he said. I didn't. Instead, after dropping Karen off at the hotel, I made a series of addict moves that ended with me surrendering my wedding ring to one thug, and when some guy pulled a pistol from a Fritos bag and pointed it at my head, my truck to another. By 5 a.m., I was being held captive in a hotel room. It's all a blur now, but somehow I got everything back, and somewhere in there, I got my crack. It was always about the crack. That morning, I convinced Karen to do the pillow show by herself. Lying in bed after she left, I asked myself the same question over and over. What has crack done to us? Karen had been a captive to all the craziness. For years, she'd had more confidence in me than anyone on the planet. By this time, though, everything was crumbling around her. People now whispered in her ear constantly, I can't believe you put up with him. Most of the time, despite our financial mess, I felt no fear. I was a survivor, a Houdini, who somehow always managed to beat the odds. Now, though, worry simmered underneath my calm exterior. With each new low, I thought that maybe my miraculous supply of luck had run out. I was terrified of letting my wife and kids down once and for all. Still, I didn't let Karen know how worried I was, just like I never let the pit bosses know I'd just lost my last chip. After I backed out of selling Wayne Belial's the company, it struck me that maybe he had been trying to take advantage of my financial desperation. But I soon realized that he was just a businessman who saw an opportunity. His plan had been to acquire a potentially valuable product while also offering Karen and me some financial security in exchange. He had been offering me a win win. Very quickly, though, another man came along who did not have Wayne's integrity. I'll call him Barry Price. Tall, with a feather duster mustache and thick salt and pepper hair, Price was a multimillionaire businessman of national prominence, sometimes featured in business magazines. He presented himself as both an ethical man and a patriot. Price had learned about My Pillow the same way Wayne did, through the home shows, which I had continued doing. I was encouraged when he called me in early 2006 after several friendly conversations. I felt that if we could arrange a fair distribution deal in one of the retail chains Price owned, I could really get my pillow off the ground. I set up a meeting with Price, an investor friend of his, and Wayne. As an investor in the My Pillow patent, Wayne still had a substantial interest in my company. By April 2006, spring rains had come and Minnesota was turning green again. The day of the Price meeting, which happened to be the day after my trip to Milwaukee, I drove to the corporate headquarters of one of the companies he owned and found my way to a conference room. I was wearing jeans and a polo shirt. When I sat down at a table full of suits, I instantly felt inferior. If only these guys knew where I was yesterday, I thought. In fact, looking around at the suits, I felt like I was in an episode of American Greed. I'd felt safer with the Milwaukee guy who pulled a gun on me. At least he was upfront about his agenda. Over the next couple of hours, Price and his investor friend put forth various propositions that would have cost me some measure of control or ownership of my company in exchange for an infusion of cash. I declined them all. Finally, Price proposed selling a private label version of my product in his stores. It was the arrangement I'd been hoping for, and I said yes. Then he made another offer. Mike, with my resources, I can make pillows cheaper than you can, he said. If you'll let me have your foam producing machine, I'll pay you for it, and then I'll sell you quantities of pillows when you need them for your shows at less than it costs you to make them now. He had my attention. With little manpower and no capital, the high cost of manufacturing had cut deeply into potential profits ever since I made my first pillows. At this point, I had little choice if I wanted to keep my company alive. Reluctantly, I signed a one-page contract selling him my machine. Soon after this meeting, Price sent a panel truck to collect the machine, which was really that converted hammer mill I'd found on the Olson farm. As my landlord, Dick, used a forklift to lift the machine onto the truck, he turned to me and said, Mike, are you really sure you want to do this? His question irritated me, but I understood why he asked it. My foam producing machine was proprietary, and it was risky turning it over. But by partnering with a businessman of Price's stature, I felt I could take my pillow to the next level. Just put it on the truck, I said. I know what I'm doing. But as I watched the truck disappear down the road, my machine in its belly, I knew deep down that I had made a terrible mistake. That same April, we got some awful news. My uncle Butch had died. The news saddened me deeply. For about a month after rehab, he'd done so well, but he relapsed badly and drank heavily for the next 2 years. Finally, Uncle Butch succumbed to the effects of alcoholism in a hotel room in Wyoming, all alone. A few days later, a small congregation gathered for his funeral in Fairmont. After the service, I stepped outside the church to have a cigarette with my dad, Jim, who had come to the funeral to honor his former brother-in-law. We were standing together, exhaling smoke streams into the cool spring air, when a clean-cut man wearing a suit walked up to me. I'd noticed him sitting in the pews with us earlier, but hadn't paid much attention to him. Now I was shocked when he gave me a hug and said, I've got to thank you. You saved my life. Okay, I said, and took a step back to put some space between us. You don't remember me, do you? The stranger said. I shook my head. No, I don't. Remember a couple of years ago, that snowy night? Do you remember a guy with long hair sitting in the corner of your uncle's place? That gave me another shock. That was you? The stuff you said, the man went on. Well, that night I quit using and found God. Like Uncle Butch, he'd gone immediately to a rehab center. A doctor there told him that if he didn't quit drinking, he'd die within a month. Unlike Uncle Butch, he hadn't taken a drink since. He'd been sober for 2 years, he told me, and was doing great. My heart warmed at his story, and I smiled. Congratulations, I said. Then a question occurred to me, one that had bugged me for all the years. I'd talked other people into taking a chance on sobriety. What did I say to you back then? I asked. And why did you believe me when I was doing drugs and drinking myself? I don't remember what you said, but it made a lot of sense. With people like Tony in Tunica and Michael in Vegas, I talked about how being an addict is such hard work, about how being an addict isn't something you are, it's something you do, and about making the choice to do something else, something higher and better. I was disappointed that this man didn't remember what I said to Uncle Butch because I needed to know for myself. As we agreed, Barry Price began manufacturing and selling the private label pillows, while I continued doing shows and fairs. Very quickly, the stock of pillows I'd already made ran low, and I called Price to place an order of his new lower cost version. He did not return my call, so I called again and again and again. I had to telephone Price many times before he finally answered. I need some pillows, I said when I had him on the line. We've got more shows coming up. I can't give them to you, Price said. My people are having problems with your machine. Well, why didn't you say so sooner? I thought. Let me come out and see your people, Barry. I can show them how to use it. The machine's not here. I sent it to a manufacturer in North Dakota. He hung up. North Dakota? We had already signed up for several shows and paid the deposits. How was I going to get more pillows and fulfill these obligations? After some digging, I learned the exact location of the hammer mill and drove 5 hours to a medium sized city in North Dakota. I took Charlie with me. Together, we found my machine in a small, run-down building in the middle of town. It wasn't even plugged in. Why aren't you using it to make fill for the pillows? I asked the owner of the building, who had begrudgingly unlocked his property to let me in. The man was in partnership with Price. We tried it, but when we put the foam in a tick and washed the pillow, the foam swelled up. Something must be wrong. You can't use just any foam, I said. I brought some of the right foam with me. Can you just let me make foam for some pillows? The owner gave me an icy glare. No, he said. This isn't your machine anymore. Get off my property. All the way home, I pondered what I was going to do next. Price had bought my hammer mill fair and square and then quarantined it, put it on the bench. It was late July. The Steele County Free Fair in Owatonna, the largest county fair in Minnesota, was coming up in mid August. This was one of the biggest sales opportunities of the year for me, and I had nothing to sell. Then it came to me. I'd made one foam shredder. I would just have to make another. The money from the home refinance in Milwaukee had come in. I used it to buy another hammer mill and got the help of an engineer friend to adapt it for making my pillow fill. With rewiring, the new machine ran like a dream, better than the old one, in fact. Soon, my pillows were stacking up in the bus shed again. Then, 2 days before Steele County, I got a call. "I know you're doing the fair," Barry Price said. "I've got pillows for you." I scowled into the phone. "What do you mean you've got pillows for me?" "We made some pillows. How many do you want?" "Oh, we made some pillows. How many do you want?" I didn't need his pillows, but now I was curious. How much? He named a price that was double what he'd told me earlier. Suddenly, everything became clear. All along, Price had wanted to control my manufacturing because he knew he could gouge me for my own pillows. "Barry, I don't need your pillows," I said with satisfaction. "I'm making my own again. I invented that machine you have, you know. Did you really not think I could make another one?" "The new one is state of the art, too. Yours is obsolete." "How could you afford to do that?" "Money's never stopped me in my life, Barry," I said. "And when you didn't make pillows for me when I needed them, you broke our agreement. From here on out, you are to have nothing more to do with my pillow." Price's tone turned dark. "Mike, I'm a millionaire, and you can't stop me." Chapter 24. Millionaires and Billionaires. I was quickly learning that it's much easier to maneuver your way into ownership of an existing product than to invent one yourself. But Price didn't scare me. He had said I couldn't stop him, but he couldn't stop me either. The fair season went well for us that year, and my pillow seemed to be taking off. Our family business was small but growing, and that gave us hope. On the family front, though, things were different. With crack, you start losing things. Karen and I had lost something. She and the kids had been my number one priority. Now crack was number one. Increasingly, the drug was coming between us. We began hiding our crack from each other, or at least each of us thought the other was hiding it. I remember getting into yelling matches about that, accusing each other of holding out. As trust leaked away, anger and suspicion began to replace softness and respect. It was also becoming harder to hide our drug use from the kids. More and more, I canceled activities with them. Even when I would try to be a good dad and go to one of the boys' ball games, I would sneak off to the park restroom and do cocaine off the ceramic toilet tank lid. Afterwards, my sons would come up to me and ask, "Did you see that, Dad?" I made up half truths. "Did you see that, Dad?" I made up half truths and outright lies, knowing all the while that time was slipping through my fingers. I knew it and felt powerless to stop it. And yet, as strange as it sounds, many who were closest to us had no idea we were addicts. When Jim and I weren't doing home shows, we were team counting to support our families and subsidize the business. That meant Jim and I, in particular, spent a ton of time together. And yet, he had no idea I was a crackhead. In fact, our adventures in card counting were forging a very close friendship. Once, the two of us, with Nick and Corey, drove 2 hours to Jackpot Junction Casino in Morton, Minnesota, to bring in some badly needed cash. But when we got there, we couldn't find a place to play. Most of the tables were too crowded. Then we found a good table. We couldn't get a positive deck. Jim, Corey, and I were watching from a distance, sipping cocktails and soft drinks, as Nick played spotter at a table with a four deck shoe. I was drinking a beer and Jim was drinking a Mountain Dew. Nick hit a big deviation, losing every hand when he should have been winning. The cards just would not fall, and the advantage stayed with the house. After a whole day of bad decks, Jim had finally had enough. Keeping his eyes on Nick's table, Jim said to us quietly, "Hey guys, watch this." And here's what happens next. He walks over to the table, his cup of iced Mountain Dew still in his hand. Jim stands there watching for a moment as if deciding whether to sit down and join the game. Then he fumbles his drink. The cup falls from his hand and lands right in the middle of the table, soaking all the cards on the felt, as well as the ones in the dealer's shoe. "Oh no," Jim says, the picture of embarrassment. "I can't believe I did that. I'm so sorry." Nick's got Mountain Dew on his shirt and pretends to be annoyed. Corey and I crack up, and the dealer has to change out all the cards in the shoe. Still embarrassed, Jim sits down and starts counting with a new deck. Now the cards are finally falling our way, and he signals our jumper, Corey. Jim leaves the table. He and I have to get lost so that the casino won't know we're all together. We decide to go wait for Corey in a nearby men's room. At this point, Jim is really nervous. The deck has gone positive, but the cards have been terrible all day. We're already deep into our bank, and Corey is now betting $300 a hand. It seems like forever before my brother rejoins us, and when he does, the news isn't good. "I lost it all," he says, hanging his head. Jim loses it, just goes absolutely nuts. Corey takes it for a minute or so, then cuts him off. "I was just kidding," he says with a grin. He pulls out a thick stack of hundreds and waves it in our faces. "I won big." Corey and I crack up again. Jim looks like he can't decide whether to hug Corey or punch him in the mouth. And that's how 2006 unfolded, card counting, home shows, and fairs. Then, that August at the Minnesota State Fair, Wayne Bellisle walked up to my booth and said, "Mike, I want you to buy me out." The Bellisles weren't selling nearly as many pillows as they had expected. Also, I still owed him $84,000 for the My Pillow patent. In an effort to make good on the loan, I offered to add Wayne's name to the patent as collateral, and he accepted. I had every intention of paying Wayne back. I just didn't know how I was going to manage it. Meanwhile, the Barry Price situation simmered in the background. He still had my original machine. If he ever got it up and running, he could copy my product and compete with me. The whole thing was bugging me, especially Price's arrogant threat that he would use his millionaire status to bully me. I could not have predicted that my next card counting trip would present a solution. After fair season ended, I flew to Laughlin, Nevada, where I planned to count at the Riverside Casino to raise more cash. I had been flying to Laughlin as often as every other month between 2004 and 2006. Recently, I had been getting to know the casino owner, Don Laughlin, on a personal basis. Don was a business visionary, and I admired his drive and innovation. He had started in 1966 with an 8-room hotel and 3 employees, and used to deal blackjack by himself. By the time I started getting to know him, it would have It would take Don half an hour just to walk across the gaming floor of the Riverside. The power bill alone at his property had gone from $170 a month in 1966 to $360,000 a month in the 2000s, and he could afford it. The power bill alone at his property had gone from $170 a month in 1966 to $360,000 a month in the 2000s, and he could afford it. While visiting with Don at the Riverside in October 2006, I mentioned my problems with Barry Price, hoping Don could give me some advice. He lied to me, then tried to gouge me, then threatened me, I complained. I don't know how to get rid of him. I think I can help you with that, Don said. He took one of his business cards and wrote on the back, Mike is a friend of mine. I have an interest in my pillow. Smiling, I put his card in my pocket. I flew back to Minnesota and couldn't wait to get off the plane. I called Price. Let's meet, I said. We got together at one of Price's offices, each of us offering fake pleasantries. Then I asked, Do you know Don Laughlin? Of course I know Don Laughlin. Know of him. Don, in Owatonna, Minnesota native, is famous in the state. Well, I do know Don, I said. You may be a millionaire, but Don is a billionaire. And here's his card. I watched Price's fake smile flatten as he read the back of Don's card. Effective immediately, I said, you will stop selling my pillow. Well, I guess this is where we part ways, he said evenly. He shook my hand and walked away. I headed for my truck and drove home smiling. Barry Price never bothered me again. While I was happy to get rid of Price, I was still eager to take my pillow to the next level. I wanted to hire more salespeople and take my product to more shows. I also wanted to film an infomercial, which I felt would multiply our direct sales far more rapidly than doing individual shows. But all those goals required money, so I went in search of investors. My brother Corey suggested I talk to a man named Jack Colby, who owned a successful supply business that catered to the hospitality industry. I first met Colby at a bar in Chaska. He had a wide, jovial smile and seemed to be a down to earth guy. Coming with Corey's recommendation, I felt I could trust him. A little later, Colby introduced me to his friend, another businessman named Shelby Bates. I couldn't get a read on Bates, who was very quiet, but along with Colby, he expressed interest in buying stock in my company. I developed a business plan that projected double digit growth, as well as a marketing plan that included the infomercial. In November 2006, after a series of discussions, I sold Colby and Bates 38% of the stock in my pillow. The money from the sale would enable me to expand. As part of the deal, Karen and I would become employees of My Pillow and receive a salary. That did not mean I was giving up control. Under IRS rules for corporations, a person can be an owner slash board member and draw profits, and also be a salaried employee. The arrangement meant that the Lindell family could stop living from show to show for the first time since we'd started the company. Also, I stipulated that I would keep the Minnesota State Fair, always the most lucrative show of the year, for myself. At this point, My Pillow did not have a board of directors. To comply with the tax code, Colby and Bates advised we create one. Of course, they wanted to be on it, and since they were major investors, I agreed. So we set up the board with just three members, Colby, Bates, and me. To raise more capital, we then sold common stock to a number of smaller investors. Part of me felt good about this. My pillow was growing, becoming more formalized and less fly by night. On the other hand, I very quickly started getting the impression that Colby and Bates cooperated with me on the surface, but were really laughing at me behind my back. It was worse than that, as it turned out. They were actually moving methodically to stab me in the back. The turnaround happened quickly. For about 3 weeks, I felt I was in the driver's seat. The board rules stated that stockholders possessing 60% or more of the shares could vote off members of the board. I figured that if Colby and Bates became a real problem, the other stakeholders and I could kick them off. But they had moved quickly and quietly to eliminate this possibility. Between them, Colby and Bates bought 3% of the company from another stockholder. That gave them a combined 41%. Now they were invulnerable. Securing their positions on the board was just the start. Colby and Bates began storing pillows in their own warehouse in Inver Grove Heights, about an hour's drive away. They began to insert themselves between my employees and me, convincing them I was a liability and that they were the ones who would take My Pillow national. The takeover took only weeks. I'd only sold them that initial block of shares in November, and by our December shareholders meeting, it all came to a head. Out in the parking lot before the meeting, which was being held at their offices, I did a big line of cocaine in my car. Then I walked into the conference room, jazzed up and confident. Colby and Bates sat with the other stockholders with official looking papers and portfolios in their hands. From the start, the tone of the meeting was contentious. Colby and Bates tried to convince me to put the money I'd earned at the Minnesota State Fair back into the company's coffers. I refused. They didn't push it. We'd already made an agreement about that. They then outlined a new strategy that focused on selling My Pillow through retail outlets. I objected. We're doing shows and an infomercial. Didn't you read my business plan? A stockholder, who was my cousin actually, said, "Just a minute, Mike. We want to know what these guys have to say." With that, I could feel that I was losing control of the shareholders group, the board, and my company. There was more discussion and several more items of business. When the meeting concluded, everyone filed out except for Colby Bates, my brother Corey, and me. Colby looked across the table at me and said, "Mike, we're moving the company to Inver Grove Heights. Also, you and Karen are fired." Digital Hawk holds and owns no copyrights to the reading of this material for educational purposes only. Thank you, Mike.